So, yeah, I think this is the first talk for a while. Yeah, I did a lot of code in my talk last year. This year I'm going to go the other way. I'm kind of going to go to the other side of the keyboard. And the things that affect us. But there's an interesting word. We use this word passion. It appears in a lot of advertisements. So I did a search a few weeks ago on LinkedIn, so you can tell my methodology is scientifically rigorous. Passionate software developer in the United Kingdom. I looked for that. Yes, exactly. See, next room, they're kind of like, wow, nearly 6,000. The demand for passion is high. Want talented individuals who are passionate. Not only do we want them to be passionate, we want them to be talented. We'd also like some individuals, please. And now we get to the interrogation. Are you passionate? Are you? Now we get to the commands. Be passionate. And now we're actually looking for a passionate and driven full-stack web developer. No, you win. Honestly, that's so many buzzwords. It's there. I mean, look at it. You can't just be passionate. You have to be driven as well. And you've got to be a full-stack web developer. It's just whoa. I'm going to come back to what we mean by full-stack a little bit later. And a couple of weeks ago, I spoke at Voxed, CERN, which was kind of a fulfillment of a childhood ambition. Somewhere in my past, I have a degree in physics. So the idea of going to CERN was, when they said, would you like to speak at CERN? I'm not sure they got to the end of the sentence before I said, yes, absolutely. Would you like the soul of my grandmother, the blood of my firstborn child, whatever it takes? However, what I didn't realize is that I had to submit my passion. And we hadn't even arranged a safe word at this point. So let's look at this word, because it turns out it's one that we use a lot. Some of its implications are positive. Some of its implications are not so positive. So let's start off with the whole thing. It's a noun, so it's a thing. Its obsolete definition in English is suffering. There's a lot of, this is a room full of software developers. Yeah, I know what you mean. That is not an obsolete definition. That is current. That is contemporary. Yes, we have passion in our workplace. What people are normally trying to tap into or harness is this: an intense enthusiasm for something. It's that intensity. This is what people are normally trying to focus on. Now, this is a difficult thing because intensity has multiple sides. Strong and barely controllable emotion. These are not different concepts. These are not different words. They are just two sides of the same aspect. Yes, I've been in places where strong and barely controllable emotion is the problem, not the solution. This is a problem. So what we see is with this word is it's not an easy word. It has some good sides, but it also has some downsides. And then there's kind of the obvious one of like, I'm pretty sure this is not what you're trying to recruit for. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to judge a company's propositions or the industry that they're engaged in, but yeah. Now, think about passion. One of the curious things is it's one of the few words that has its own color. It gets a color. How cool is that? Most words just get spelling. But no, this word actually gets a color, red. And red is an interesting color because red in itself has many different connotations and suggestions. We teach our children, red means stop. Okay? So, we want passion and we want you to stop the passion. What? It also means fail. Yeah. But it can also be the first step of a TDD cycle. Red, green, refactor. That's a path to success. You start with red. It's not ending in failure, it's starting in failure. So you see that there's a lot of ambiguity here. It is also associated with love. It's also associated with blood. It's also associated with Mars, the red planet, which actually, if you wiped all the red dust off it, which is mostly orange, it would actually be grey as the moon. But Mars is also the god of war. This is kind of an interesting shot because most of the shots that I've included in a couple of talks on atomic testing, atomic weapons testing, they're all black and white. But this is an interesting one. It's actually red, conveniently enough. This is a shot of Castle Bravo, a series of nuclear explosions, test explosions, done by the US. And this is 1954. This is the largest detonation the US ever made. It's 15 megatons. Our ability to destroy in the name of passion is unparalleled. And by the way, don't ever feel bad about getting your estimates wrong, because this was supposed to be 6 megatons. They got it wrong by a factor of 2.5 and managed to irradiate some villages, destroy some islands, and a few other bits and pieces. Passion can be very destructive. But there's another side to all of this. This is Sophia Khan. She lives in Birmingham. This is 2 years ago. And she's confronting, the fellow on the right is a member of the EDL, the English Defence League, who are a kind of basically far-right fascist organization. You just look at the picture here. Who has the power in this? And so this went viral 2 years ago. And her quote about this is absolutely magnificent. Sometimes it's more important to smile than to shout. We recognize there's a lot of passion. Passion is all of this. But there's something else as well. There's a balance. And it was one of these things that always troubled me. Oh, passion. We want passionate developers. Yeah, that term is too ambiguous. It needs balance. There's another passion. Dispassion. There's a dispassion that balances passion. Absence of passion. There's a simple definition. Coolness. Because obviously that's us. Yeah, when that's it's like, hey, I'm a software developer. It's just like, yeah, how cool is that? Oh no, really. So we think we're cool. Okay. The state or quality of being emotionally uninvolved. This is quite an important idea. It suggests, so the positive side of this is that we're able to look at something objectively. We're able to distance ourselves. We're able to let go of something. That's quite powerful. We actually find that quite difficult, particularly when we create code, particularly when we create software. And then you realize, and somebody says, actually, we don't need this anymore. And it's just like, well, maybe I've got to let go. So the passion is the bit that puts it in the ground. This is the bit that lets you leave it there. It's just like, yeah, I can let go of that. The problem, however, is that in amidst all of this detachment and objectivity, perhaps we distance ourselves too much. In other words, we lose our emotional involvement and the care that we might have. We end up with I don't care, which is probably not what we want. And objectivity. Freedom from passion, bias, or emotion. Now, the problem with dispassion, as one of the passions, the problem with dispassion is we're not very good at it. It's actually not a very comfortable human state. And we often try to aspire to it. It's like, yeah, we can be totally logical and unbiased. In fact, this is the wonderful thing. If you ask anybody, do you think you're biased? Generally, the answer is no, followed by, but I know people who are. There is actually a cognitive bias for this. The cognitive bias is known as the bias blind spot. It is the belief that you and you alone somehow see the world as it is, but the other people don't. Yeah? You see the world as you are. We all have biases. It's the degree of awareness and the degree to which we are governed by those. Objectivity is not a very natural human state, although it has its value. We see this in the nature of science and engineering, and being able to say, yeah, this is good, this is sound, this will not fall over, this will not crash, this is, versus the idea of it feels good. So that code we're going to ship, that code that's going to go into production, does it work? Well, it feels like it should. well, that's not good. So this is where, so you see, the problem here is that we've got this kind of conflict. Passion is telling us a bunch of stuff, some of which is good, not all of which is good. Dispassion, oh, that sounds like the obvious opposite and what we want. But again, it's not everything, and it's very difficult. We're not, as humans, we're not that good at it. But sometimes we think that we are. Oh, that's the worst bit, where we think, no, I'm not biased. This code submitted by this other person is no good. Yes. We like to think that we're really good at logic. What I like to think is that I think this book cover is magnificent. This is one of the books I learned logic from, which somehow dates me a little bit. People just don't use typefaces like that anymore. Yeah. So we think, oh yeah, I work with code, therefore I must be logical, because I deal with logic every day. Yeah, you know what? That somehow passes through us. It doesn't stay. And we think, okay, code. Let's start talking about what it is that makes developers developers. There is this idea, we got the logic, but what is code? It turns out that code is not simply a system of logic. It's codified knowledge. When you develop a code base, what you're doing is you're codifying knowledge. What you're doing as a team is saying, here is how we believe this system should be built based on our knowledge and understanding of the domain, our knowledge of one another and our practices, and our knowledge of the technology. And what you're doing is that code is defining a relationship between all of these. Here is what we know. Now, sometimes it scares developers because they kind of go, oh, hang on. You're saying that my code base is actually our collective knowledge as a team. Wow, we're really weird. Because if you think about it, if you look at a code base like that, what it means is that you end up with, well, what's a legacy code base? A legacy code base is old knowledge. Oh, and not so old knowledge, and some kind of newish knowledge, and some new knowledge, and some complete guesswork. In other words, your code base is a codification of things we thought now, things we thought last week, things we thought 6 months ago, and things that somebody 5 years ago thought, but we've never met them. So it's a mishmash. So there's this idea that it turns out that our knowledge can be contradictory. It also tells us that rather than thinking about it as a system of logic, and then thinking that programming, the very act of laying down the code, is an act of coding logic, it means the whole programming aspect, indeed the whole software development process, no matter what your role, is a process of knowledge acquisition. You are learning. That's what you're doing. Now, this is kind of interesting. This has a whole load of implications. Because what this means, and at this point I always tell people, by the way, use this phrase when you are talking to higher-ups in your organization, because it sounds really good. So can you tell us about your development process? Well, we have a development process that is founded on knowledge acquisition cycles in order to leverage the synergies of our technology and our team's intellectual capital. Yeah, feel free to use that phrase as well. That just came out of nowhere. It's one of those you can just complete. Yeah, that sounds good. Alternatively, you could try and use some basic English learning. That's what it is. But it doesn't sound very effective. But that's what it is. If you think about it, software development is an act of learning and recording your learning. Hey, guess what? We just learned this. The point is, it's not stuff that you know in advance, because software development is not a thing that, when you develop a system, you don't know everything about it. You cannot know. Because if you knew everything about it, then that system probably already exists, which means your job is done, which is great. Yeah? In the real world, when somebody says, I want something like that, then that's a real problem. There's a logistics involved. I have to say, oh, I want a physical copy of that book. Well, that book has to be delivered to me. That book has to be made. I want that car. That car has to be made physically. But if somebody says, I want software that does exactly that, then what you do is you give them the URL and you are done. Yeah? You don't go and say, oh, let me put the bits together for you. We have artisan. That's not the meaning of the craft here. We have artisan specially selected curly brackets just for you. These are your curly brackets, not some other guys. The point there is that software development is not the manufacture of identical artifacts. We solve that problem. It's called a compiler. It's called a build pipeline. These are solved problems. The real world, when you have physics, the challenge is to build identical artifacts. That's manufacturing. In software development, the challenge is to produce differentiation. People don't say, I want that. They say, I want that, but slightly different. I want this with a change. I want this with a different database at the back end. I want this based on a different technology, against different laws, in a different language, in whatever. It's always, so in other words, the value of software is differentiation. It's not being identical, which means by definition, you've probably not done it before, which means by definition, you will not know everything. So you are always operating in a state of incomplete knowledge. Now, this is kind of interesting when we go back to this idea of dispassion, because if you're operating with incomplete knowledge, how do you do that? How do you plan for a thing that you don't know? This is kind of interesting, because it suggests that it's not logical, it's not as objective. You have to kind of get in there. It also suggests if you've got a group of people, then you're going to need to do something together. Now, this is an interesting thing, because communication, that's how you get knowledge out of one person's head into another person's head. It's the very act of trying to communicate with the code. There's a really interesting thing here. There's another thing here as well, which we often overlook with the word communication. It means with, Latin for with. This is the same foundation as communion, the act of being at one, as community, the act of a group of people being at one. That's what it is. This is a binding. This is kind of an interesting thing, which also means there's going to be social negotiation. Half the conversations that developers have are actually about social negotiation. When you're trying to agree on a coding guideline or a coding practice, it's actually social negotiation. It's not about who is right or who is wrong, or rather, if it can degenerate into that. But the problem is that that's not really what it's about. You might think it's about that, but actually what you're doing is social negotiation. It also means that what you produce is a model of participation. We don't generally use this phrase, but that's another way of saying software architecture. Yeah? Because if you think about it, what is architecture? Architecture, if we're going to use the building metaphor, architecture doesn't simply define a structure. Architecture defines how people work together and live together. Yeah? It defines how people flow through a building. Well, why don't we pay a little more attention to the metaphor? Because we actually work out that that's funny, that's the same in our code. Your architecture includes your tooling, it includes your version control practices, it includes your habits, your seating space. All of these things tell you, and particularly if you're a newcomer, they tell you how you're going to participate in this act of collective knowledge organization. So there's something interesting there. It's very social. It doesn't feel quite as dispassionate, but I'm not sensing the passion here either. There's something else here which we're going to get to. So this is the book Romeo mentioned that I edited a few years ago. And I put in the preface. I tried to capture some of the struggle that we have when people try to define what is it that software development is. So I put in there is an art, craft, and science to programming that extends far beyond the program. The act of programming marries the discrete world of computers with the fluid world of human affairs. And it turns out that this is kind of the interesting bit. The fact is that we're talking about art and craft and science. We're talking about both the things that we would associate with passion and dispassion, both the things we have in terms of enthusiasm and in terms of objectivity, but also we're finding that there is a contradiction and why it is that people often struggle to pigeonhole software development as one thing. It's because it straddles two worlds. It lives between two worlds. It's not just about the computer, it's about the real world. It turns out that people in the real world are kind of messy. They're kind of fluid. Truth is a very negotiable thing, okay? Look, I'm from Britain. We have a very, very abstract idea of truth at this point in history, okay? Apparently, is this statement true? Does that? Well, it feels true. It feels true to me. It feels true because somebody put lots of money into it. It feels, I think I want a little more dispassion on this one. But at the same time, people are driven with the passion. We also see programmers are between these worlds. They mediate between these certainties. There's kind of no opinion. The program crashed. Well, maybe crash is too harsh a word. It's like, no, really, that's actually the best way of describing it. Although, if you want some alternative terms, from spaceflight, I offer you the word RUD, R-U-D. If a craft explodes in flight, a RUD event is a rapidly unscheduled disassembly. Oh, no, the craft didn't explode. It was just a RUD. What? No, they really, yeah. So feel free to use that next time, your server crashes. So here's the thing. This is, everybody's into manifestos. This has now become a bit of a forgotten manifesto. It's from 20 years ago, the Clue Train Manifesto. This is the book form of it. And one of the most interesting things is this was, as it says, the end of business as usual. This was 95 statements, Martin Luther style, about the end of business as usual. This was about business-to-business programming and software and connection. And it's just like, wow, somebody wrote a manifesto about B2B. Really? How exciting can that be? It turns out it's quite exciting. There's some really interesting observations here. So here we see there's something else going on here. We're finding this contradiction, this duality. So people in high tech take pride in their work. Pride, that's a passion, that's not a dispassion. They are individuals who see the details of the things they produce in the light of the trials and triumphs they experience while creating products. In the courage of creation, they find a place to hang their individuality. Programmers and technotypes appreciate elegant spare code and the occasional well-turned architectural hack. I like that. This is a manifesto I can sign up to. There's a quality of imperfection that is in Japanese art, wabi-sabi, of something cannot be too perfect, or rather introducing an imperfection somehow makes it better. But there's something here. And so there's a very human quality to this. But this idea of knowledge and logic and framing our logic, well, here's a book on how to write a story structure, screenwriting by Robert McKee, story. And he captures an idea which I think for me also comes into this aspect of creativity that we see in software development. He makes this observation. He says, if a plot works out exactly as you first planned, you're not working loosely enough to give room to your imagination and instincts. Now, this is a really interesting thing, because what he's saying is if you've planned something and it comes out exactly according to plan, you're not doing it right. That's interesting. Now, I know that we often struggle to achieve certain deadlines and goals, but there's a little part of me that says, that is kind of disturbed by the idea of that, well, what if it did all work out? What if we did plan something and it went exactly according to plan? There's a little part of me that's disappointed because it means that we learnt nothing, because we got everything right. It's like, okay, well, do I want to do that again, or do I want to do something that's new or novel? There's a little bit there that says we want to learn some more. So let's mess about with words. So there's a page I run on Facebook about words and language, Word Friday, and here's an interesting one, pantser. That's not obvious what that one means, but it is one of my favorite words. It comes from the creative writing community. A writer who writes by the seat of their pants. Okay, this is best captured by the American author Louis L'Amour, who was once asked by his daughter why he was typing so fast. And he said, because I want to find out what happens. That's pantsing, okay? And this is in contrast to a plotter. A plotter is somebody who works everything out to the nth degree. There's an interesting contrast. Now, the temptation for many people is to say, right, these are, guess what? These are binary, zeros and ones. You're either a plotter or a pantser. So no, ease off. It turns out that people are normally on a spectrum between these two. And in different cases, they may be more plotter or more pantser. But there's that acknowledgement of, even if you do plan, maybe there's some surprises waiting for you. And if you don't plan, then maybe things happen and the plan becomes clear. There's this idea. So in other words, although this is from writing, this is the work of creation. It is the work of not knowing everything. This is important. So the language of logic doesn't quite help us, although we do like to think of ourselves as being incredibly logical. So this is George Boole, who gave his name to the Boolean data type. He's most famous for that. He's probably unaware of it. Honestly, some of the code that I've seen, he's probably spinning in his grave. But it's a classically Victorian book. These days we call it The Laws of Thought. But back then, people hadn't come up with snappy marketing slogans and things like that. These days, if you were going to market this book, it would be like thought distilled, extreme thought, thought-driven thought. It'd be something. it'd be something like that. But no, back in the 19th century, peak Victorian era, an investigation of the laws of thought on which are founded are mathematical theories of logic and probabilities. He was the first guy to properly formalize propositional calculus. And we love to think that we're all very, very logical, but it turns out our reasoning is a little bit skewed. So let's also go back to the 19th century and talk about the engineer responsible for some of the world's first computers in the sense that we might recognize them. So mechanical work of Charles Babbage, the analytical and the difference engines. And this absolutely fascinating observation, on 2 occasions I have been asked, right, Mr. Babbage, if you put into the machine wrong figures, will the right answers come out? I'm not able rightly to apprehend the kind of confusion of ideas that could provoke such a question. This is magnificently Victorian English, but it's a really good insight. Honestly, feel free to use this the next time somebody says something really bizarre or stupid in a meeting. I am not able rightly to apprehend the kind of confusion of ideas that provoke such a question. It's like, what? But this is the thing. We fool ourselves, because sometimes we think we are logical and we are free of bias, that we are able to produce things that are complete, rather than recognizing that we are always operating with incomplete knowledge. And therefore, most of what we're going to discover is not necessarily something we would have thought of now. And we cannot say, yeah, the code is free of bugs. Oh yeah, I feel that it's good. So let's go back to the red planet. Let's go back to 2016. This is an artist's impression of the Schiaparelli probe, which was due to land on Mars in October of 2016. And here's what happened. Schiaparelli's inertial measurement unit, IMU, went about its business of calculating the lander's rotation rate. Okay, so as it enters the atmosphere, to keep stability, the craft should be spinning. Okay. For some reason, we will come to, the IMU calculated a saturation maximum period that persisted for 1 second longer than what? Okay, so we're off by 1. That's never happened, ever, in the history of computing at all. Oh no. When the IMU sent this bogus information to the craft's navigation system, it calculated a negative altitude. And no, it's not sitting there thinking like, oh crap, I'm in the Netherlands. It's like, it's not that. Yeah, I can insult other countries as well, but honestly, I could have said Louisiana, but the Netherlands is easier to pick on because really most of it is below water level. Yeah. So, and European Space Agency does have quite a lot of infrastructure in the Netherlands. So, calculated negative altitude. Now, how did this occur? Well, one of the things I love about the European Space Agency is they publish all of their reports. It's great. And you can also get another insight. I just gave you one piece of rocketry terminology earlier on, RUD. Their most preferred term for anything is anomaly. Okay, NASA used this, AC used it, anomaly. I love this Schiaparelli anomaly inquiry. It's so understated. Yeah. So next time everything goes horribly, horribly wrong at your workplace, you can say, oh, we've experienced an anomaly. It's just like, yeah, the whole thing's crashed, the company's going out of business. It's an anomaly. So we've got this. And there's this beautiful bit. Because of the error in the estimated attitude that occurred at parachute inflation, let's understand what went on here. We can actually understand it relatively easily. So it's spinning. It's coming into the atmosphere. As you can imagine, entering a planet's atmosphere is pretty harsh. You're basically trying to kill interplanetary velocities and get them down to 0. Okay, it's a very turbulent and violent experience for the craft. It's going to wobble, so it tracks the wobble. Now, what you'd hope is that as the craft is tracking the wobble, that as it goes 1 degree this way, and then it goes 1 degree the other way, that it makes a note that it is now going the other way. Somebody, basically, let me oversimplify this, forgot to set the flag to 0 when it returned. So instead of 1 degree, minus 1 degree, minus 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree this way, 1 degree that way, it goes 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 degrees. And eventually starts thinking, hey, I'm upside down. At which point, this beautiful observation of school mathematics, which with an erroneous off-vertical angle and deduced a negative altitude, the cosine of an angle greater than 90 degrees is negative. Oh, yes, well, that's true. And do you know how much code there was to check for this bizarre, anomalous outcome? None. Why? Because it can't happen. Anyway, it happened. And that fateful measurement set off a cascade of despair. Again, I offer you another phrase you can use in meetings. You know, when things go wrong, oh yeah, that set off a cascade of despair. You know, there's something almost beautiful and poetic about it. Triggering the premature release of the parachute, the back shell, a brief firing of the braking thrusters, and activation of the on-ground systems, as if Schiaparelli had already reached the surface. Basically, the probe has arrived, and it's going, oh crap, I'm still fully dressed. Get rid of everything. The only problem is that it's 3.7 kilometers above the ground. Now, Martian gravity may be lower than Earth's, but it's sufficiently high that this is going to make a bit of a difference, and the impact crater was visible from orbit. So yes, technically, Schiaparelli did land on Mars. So what do we learn from this? This is all software. This is all simple situations. This is all assumptions. This is all the idea that we know everything, that we are working in a closed space. Logic is wonderful in a closed thing. But the problem is, software development, by its nature and its interaction with the world, is surprisingly open. It's open-ended. Therefore, your knowledge will always be incomplete. You should expect the unexpected, as Monty Python advises us. One of my favorite papers on this is it's one of those titles that tells you everything about the paper. There's no ambiguity here. Simple testing can prevent most critical failures. So, what do you mean? An analysis of production failures in distributed data-intensive systems. Almost all catastrophic failures are the result of incorrect handling of non-fatal errors, explicitly signaled in code. In other words, something bad happens, but we either have not tested the code or have not handled it. It turns out most of the happy day scenarios are quite happy. They are the most well-trodden ground. Those are the bits that we are drawn to testing. We don't create software to test its failures. We create software to get some kind of value. The problem is this doesn't have value. We have a blind spot here. Why? Because we're human. It's a bias. Sometimes people say, oh, but our legacy code, we can't test it. This is really interesting. These are complex distributed systems they're observing. A majority of the production failures, 3/4, can be reproduced by a unit test. So often people object and say, we can't test this because it's too complex. Maybe we need to be a little more creative. Yeah. So, I guess I should say something about TDD. James Grenning, in his book on embedded test-driven development for embedded C++, one of the things I love about this book is that it's one of those books that it doesn't matter if you're not doing it. Oh no, it's embedded C, not even embedded C++. It doesn't matter if you're not doing C and if you're not working in the embedded space. It's the very fact that this book is in exactly the space that people say you can't do that. In other words, people say, oh no, we're special. Guess what? All software development is special. Because by definition, it's the production of difference. When people say, oh, we can't do that, we can't test here, we can't do TDD because we're special. Oh, really? So you're using like completely archaic language? No, we're using a modern language. Oh, okay. And it's in an embedded environment. Oh, no, we've got all the tools. In which case, what's the problem? Because here's a book on how to do it in an extreme environment. TDD is fun. It's like a game where you navigate a maze of technical decisions. Oh, now, wait a minute. This is interesting. Technical decisions that lead to highly robust software. This is very, very dispassionate, while avoiding the quagmire of long debug sessions. With each test, there is a renewed sense of accomplishment and clear progress towards the goal. This is enriching the human side of me. Automated tests record assumptions, capture decisions, and free the mind to focus on the next challenge. This is all really good. This is actually a beautiful summary of what you want from this. But for me, the most important part of the paragraph is the opening sentence. Somewhere we need to remember that stuff is allowed to be fun. We're allowed to enjoy ourselves. Perhaps we take the dispassionate stuff too seriously. Perhaps we take our own language of productivity a little bit too seriously. Productivity is a very cold word. It's okay for things to be fun. Like when I go to the Netherlands. Yeah, sorry, Merit. Here is apparently, so this is using the Dutch rail website. Order confirmation. This email is not a valid ticket. Order number null. Apparently, it's not a valid order confirmation either. But it's okay. I can go to Copenhagen and enjoy some Matrix-like art in the airport. So I've been taking pictures of this stuff for years. And then people started sending me stuff. And about 3 years ago, somebody coined the phrase Kevlin Henney screen. I suddenly became a thing. Apparently, I'm quite scary. You're never safe from a Kevlin Henney. This is a safe distance. Now, the point here is I'm interested in these failures because they reveal how systems are constructed, but they also reveal the system of people around it. In other words, how quickly do these bugs get fixed? What is being put in place? Because sometimes it tells you about the organization. But there's this idea of highlighting these failures because they're a reminder that, guess what? We run the world. We didn't necessarily ask for it, but it turns out that software runs the world. And it has got to the point where I've appeared in the register just before Christmas, made 3 Kevlin Henneys at Waterloo Station. A Kevlin Henney is a humiliating public software failure, photographed and tweeted to the eponymous account. Kevlin Henneys are frequently seen at ATM machines and supermarket checkouts, but the best ones usually occur at transport hubs, where they enjoy the full benefit of giant displays. I started photographing them partly because I thought they were a good form of art, but also they were a reminder of human fallibility. We must recognize we have these limits. And just to check these things, I've even made it into Urban Dictionary, which I find absolutely fascinating, because normally I use Urban Dictionary to figure out what the hell my kids are saying. But one of the best bits about this, and I showed this one to my wife, it's just like, look, you can get a Kevlin Henney mug. And she said, no, it's good, I've got one. So yeah, it's kind of got to the point where we're now playing with recursion. This was at Agile in the City in Bristol. John Clapham, the organizer, he said, quick, there's a Kevlin Henney downstairs. And I'm going, yeah, there's one here as well. He said, no, I want to take a picture of you in front of it so that then you can retweet it. Whoa. So we did it again next year. And this is at DevTernity in Riga. Now, sometimes people tell you, they say, as you get older, you shrink. It's true. It's true. There it is. And in fact, going back to Voxed CERN, somebody taking a picture of me taking a picture, it's a meta Kevlin Henney. Now, the whole point about this is, one, it's a little bit of fun, but the other thing is that it's that reminder of our boundaries. It's that idea that perhaps we're not noble in reason and infinite in faculty. Our reason is quite flawed. Our reason is arbitrary. It's subject to evolution. We are quite finite as human beings. We can be surprisingly smart, but we can also be surprisingly stupid. We are not perfect. Yeah? So what's missing? I think what's missing from the picture is the whole being a human thing. In other words, what passion and dispassion don't give the whole story. And it was one of these things that made me realize there's the missing third pillar that holds it up, that binds everything together, that binds the passions together. The third passion, compassion. Okay, how do we understand compassion? Sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. Remember what the word passion meant? Suffering. It means literally to suffer with. Okay? In other words, there's the recognition of other people. Most of the stuff about passion and dispassion is about individuals. Remember with the opening advert, you want an individual who's passionate. It turns out that software is made of people. It's like Soylent Green, but it's mostly socially acceptable. It's made by people, of people. Organizations are made of people. In other words, it's plural. Occasionally, a software system might be produced by one person, but that is quite rare. And over time, that will become less true. In other words, if you start with one genius writer, eventually there will be many people. So the idea that software is produced by an individual is fleeting and random and occurs perhaps in university and private projects. Most of what we do is together, and it's not covered by these other passions. Someone shows a kindness. There's also a human side to this. And this is quite important for our workplace, because it turns out that most people, when they make these errors, when we make mistakes, I found that most software developers are actually really rather nice people. And I've dealt with lots of professions. I think the software developers are surprisingly nice. I say surprising, not because, my goodness, who knew? I mean surprising when I compare it with the average people in other professions. What I think is interesting is that if we do things that end up being bad, most of the time it's not because we're intentionally being bad or stupid. It's because we're human and we are subject to our environment. And that's the next bit, our environment. Now, I don't like to pick out companies individually, but I'm going to pick on Revolut because they are scum. And I don't use that word lightly. Here's what the CEO is basically saying. I noticed several product owners, team leaders are significantly below targets and still do not work on weekends to catch up. There is a simple rule in place. Product owners and team members with performance ratings significantly below expectations will be fired without any negotiations after the review. People and teams rated below expectations will be placed on watch list. I quote the British science fiction author John Brunner. If there is such a phenomenon as absolute evil, it consists in treating another human being as a thing. We can see that this will influence your experience of the work environment and therefore the work that you do. You are not cut off from your environment. The idea that this is a motivational model that is viable is shocking. This is not a new idea. The 18th century lexicographer Samuel Johnson made the observation, getting money is not all a man's business. To cultivate kindness is a valuable part of the business of life. This is quite important when we talk about things like business value. Whenever people talk about producing value, I always say, well, what do you mean by value? Because it turns out people's answers are different, and it doesn't always end up in money. Yeah? So the question is that when people say we're prioritizing by business value, well, actually you can't prioritize by business value. It's actually physically impossible unless you have a time machine. You can only prioritize by estimated business value. That's different. But what do you value? And it turns out that valuing the short-term revenue is a completely different model to having a long-term company. These two are both values, but they are different. And so there's a really interesting point here that we need to understand, that instead of pushing the buttons of objectivity or passion, we need to be a little more careful. So April's going to be talking at greater length about this tomorrow in her keynote, but I love the fact she came up with this kind of compassionate coding, this set of compassionate tech values. Let's kind of replace this. There's been a lot of stuff about ego, humility. The whole point is you have to enter every conversation with the recognition that you do not know everything. Now, for people who do know everything, this can be quite upsetting. Or rather, for the people who think they know everything. Remember, you are always, by definition, operating with incomplete knowledge. And that's actually not a failing, that's what it is to be human. This morning you woke up and you did not know exactly what was going to happen today. And guess what? You're doing great. It turns out we do this every day. The problem comes when we kid ourselves that we know everything. Yeah? It's the illusion. Normally, it's a case of like, I don't know everything, but that's not a problem. Our team doesn't know everything about this product. Not a problem. We're good at learning. That's the real value in there. So humility means we don't know everything, and that's absolutely fine. We may be surprised by stuff. Bring people in. It turns out that actually it kind of makes a difference. Different people, collective intelligence. When people use the term competition, they often misuse it. Most of what we talk about is cooperation. When we talk about teams, it's cooperation. That's what defines a team. Being smart versus learning. Smart is if you come across the mindset, fixed mindset and growth mindset. Fixed mindset's on the left, growth mindset's on the right. The idea that actually I don't know everything and it's okay and I might learn some stuff and I might make some mistakes and that's kind of cool, as opposed to I have a reputation to defend, which is the left-hand side. Being a rock star. What does being a rock star mean? It means trashing the code. Throwing the code out of the hotel window. It's just like having, we try to be rock stars because we have, listen to our language. Oh yes, we don't say we're going to pass some arguments to that method over there. We say we're going to inject it with dependencies. Okay, we got the drug language just straight in there. Yeah, so the whole rock star thing. No, this is not good. So, the other thing is you've got to understand that as a team, you also have incomplete knowledge of all the people around you. You have no idea what they're going through. Somebody might be really grouchy, and you think, oh, damn, they're producing bad code or something like that. Honestly, they could just be having a bad day. They could be having a bad month or a bad year. You don't know. Just err on the safe side. And also be kind to yourself. You've got to be kind to yourself. We're really bad at doing this. We beat ourselves up. It's shocking. And look after yourself. One of my favorite recent observations comes from Hillel Wayne. The biggest boost to productivity. I'm going to give you the secret. Here it is. I found it on the internet. It's true. One of my most controversial software opinions is that your sleep quality and stress level matter far, far more than the languages you use or the practices you follow. Nothing else comes close. Not type systems, not TDD, not formal methods, not anything. So that, honestly, that's just, that is the slide, okay? If you want to take a picture of that. Honestly, go into work on Monday and say, I have the solution. Oh, what's the methodology called? Is it called Scrum, Scram? Is it, what is it? What metaphor does it use? It's called sleep. What kind of sleep? A good night's sleep. What, for who? Do we appoint somebody to that? Is that the product? No, the whole team. Whoa, okay, that's pretty heavy. I'm not sure we can do that. Lovely book, again, on creative work. Austin Kleon, I love his work. Keep going. Recent book, Sleep Tidies the Brain. It's a lovely way of looking at it. And this is kind of important because we need to remember that what we're doing is we're playing a game of group intelligence. We're trying to play a game together. It's a cooperative game. It's an open-ended game. The goal is not to finish. The goal, if you like, the goal of software development is to keep on playing the game of software development. Yeah, it's not a game that ends 90 minutes each way, 45 minutes each way, that's it, you're done. No, the goal of the game is to keep playing the game. And you're doing it in a team. And you're trying to increase the intelligence. Another brilliant observation from Brandon Schwartz I thought was brilliant.